Welcome to the halfway dark.
The stranger who watches. I noticed it first on a Tuesday. The feeling, more than the sight. That quiet, unshuckable awareness that someone was watching me. I shrugged it off, blaming too much coffee or the way my apartment's street-facing windows caught the morning sun. But when I glanced toward the front window and saw movement, a shadow ducking behind a parked car, my stomach tightened. No one should be there. The street was empty. That night, the unease followed me inside. Every creak, every distant thump felt magnified. I double-checked the locks, even peered through the peephole, expecting maybe a prankster teen. Nothing. Just the normal city hum, cars, and the occasional bark of a dog. Still, sleep was impossible. Something had shifted, and I could feel it. Days passed. Small things began to change. My front door, which I always locked twice, seemed slightly ajar in the morning. Not enough to force a door open, but enough that I'd feel a shiver run down my spine. I told myself I was imagining it. Maybe I'd left it unlocked one night. Rationality is a fragile shield against creeping dread. Then I saw the note. A scrap of lined paper, pinned to the corner of my mailbox by a tack. Written in neat, almost obsessive handwriting. You noticed me. I froze. My hand hovered over the page, heart hammering. No footprints in the gravel. No other signs of a presence. Just that note. My rational brain shouted coincidence, prank, mistake. My gut screamed otherwise. I called a friend, described it, tried to laugh it off. Probably just some kid messing around, I said. But even as I said it, my voice quavered. My friend reassured me, probably more to reassure themselves than me. The nights grew worse. The shadow on the street appeared more often. Always at dusk, always just out of reach of clarity. I began noticing subtle marks. A scratch on the side of my doorframe I didn't remember. A footprint in the dust on the windowsill. Each time I tried to rationalize, something inside whispered that I was being observed, cataloged, studied. Then came the sound. Soft, deliberate tapping at the glass. Not once, but a rhythm. 3 slow, measured taps. When I peeked through the blinds, the street was empty. No one, but the taps continued, soft against the window. A chill ran down my spine. My reflection stared back at me, wide-eyed and pale. I started leaving lights on. Every night, the apartment glowed like a beacon, but the feeling never went away, and I began noticing items subtly moved. My keys, my wallet, a mug left on the counter, each slightly displaced, as if someone had entered while I wasn't watching. I called the police. They checked. Nothing. No sign of forced entry, no footprints beyond what I could see myself. They suggested cameras. I set up one by the front door. The footage was maddening. Each night, the camera recorded nothing until the early hours. Then a figure appeared. I couldn't make out a face, only the faint glint of a hooded jacket. It didn't break in. It didn't touch anything visible to the lens. It just stood, waiting, sometimes moving just enough to adjust its stance, always retreating before the recording ended. I couldn't sleep. My days became a haze of exhaustion, coffee, and the incessant paranoia of being watched. Friends started to worry. Move, they said. It's not safe. I didn't want to leave. The apartment was mine. But the creeping dread grew, gnawing at every corner of my consciousness. One night, I awoke to a sound I will never forget. The front door clicked, softly, deliberately. My heart skipped. I stayed frozen, listening. Footsteps, slow, methodical. Across the hardwood, they traced the living room's perimeter, pausing briefly by my bedroom door. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. The room was dark, shadows pooling in corners. The footsteps approached, paused at the threshold, and then a whisper, barely audible. Sleep tight. Morning. I woke on the couch, bundled in a blanket I didn't remember using. The door was locked. No one in sight. No prints, no signs, nothing. But the note was back, pinned again to the mailbox. This time, see you tonight. I installed cameras in every room, locked every door, every window. Yet every night, the feeling persisted. The taps, the shadows, the whispers. Sometimes I saw it in reflections, glimpsed it in mirrors, just out of focus. A figure standing in the corner of the room, gone when I turned. Weeks blurred into a cycle of dread. I began keeping my blinds closed, my apartment lit in a harsh, fluorescent glow. I didn't answer calls, avoided going out. I stopped trusting the city street, the neighbors, even my own senses. Every noise became a potential signal, every shadow a confirmation. The climax came on a Sunday. I had barricaded the front door with every piece of furniture I could manage. Cameras everywhere. Nothing would get in. I lay in bed, exhausted, when I felt it. The air shifting, impossibly cold. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You think you're safe?" Then a noise behind me. Not loud, not a crash, but the subtle brush of fabric against floorboards. I froze. My pulse was deafening. Slowly, I turned. Nothing. I could see only the dim light from the monitors lining the hallway. I checked the cameras. Every feed blank, except one. The lens facing the bedroom. There, standing at the edge of the frame, impossibly still, impossibly human. But it wasn't moving naturally. Its head tilted at an impossible angle. Its eyes, too bright, too knowing, fixed on me. I screamed. I bolted. Every barricade, every lock, every camera, useless. The apartment felt alive, every corner hiding something, and I ran to the street. In the harsh sunlight, I thought I was safe. But when I glanced back, the front door slowly creaked open. No wind, no reason. Just the door, swinging as if inviting me back. I moved the next day. New city, new apartment. I told myself I was safe. I checked the locks, installed alarms. Yet sometimes at night, I feel it. Watching, waiting, just outside. I don't see it, but I feel it. And every time I catch a reflection in the glass, I swear, it's smiling back. If you're hearing this, and you think it couldn't happen to you, be careful. Someone could be watching right now, waiting for the moment you let your guard down. And if you want to hear more stories that creep under your skin and refuse to leave, subscribe to Halfway Dark. You won't regret it. The apartment above me. I moved into the building on a Tuesday. It was an older place, with narrow hallways and creaking floors. The kind of building you pass by 100 times without noticing, until you live there. My apartment was small but clean, with a view of the street below. Nothing extraordinary. Nothing to prepare me for what was coming. The first week was quiet, almost too quiet. I told myself I liked it that way. But on the second night, I heard it. A faint shuffle from above. Not heavy footsteps, just something subtle, deliberate. I paused, holding my breath, convinced I'd imagined it. Buildings creak. Floors settle. Old pipes sigh. Rational explanations. I repeated them like a mantra. Then I noticed the door. My front door, which I always left unlocked during the day, was slightly ajar one morning. Not enough for a break-in. Nothing obvious, just slightly off. I remembered locking it the night before. I blamed myself, distracted, maybe tired. It didn't stop there. Objects started moving. A mug left on the counter would be slightly rotated. A pair of socks misplaced. The feeling that I was being watched began to grow, gnawing at my sleep. One evening, I called my friend Sam. "You're imagining it," he said, trying to be reassuring. But the next night, as I lay on my couch scrolling my phone, I heard a sound so precise it froze me. A faint tap, 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 like someone pacing in a rhythm they didn't want me to hear. I told myself again, old buildings, settling floors. But the rhythm grew familiar. It moved with me. If I stopped walking, the taps paused. If I sat still, they circled around the ceiling beams, keeping pace. I installed a small camera on the ceiling corner of my living room, pointing toward the hallway. I told myself it was paranoia, but I wanted evidence. The footage revealed nothing at first. The first night, the camera captured only the shadows of the hallway. But the second night, a flicker. Something moved across the frame for a second. Not a shadow from the street, not the ceiling fan. Something that didn't belong. The following week, my sleep vanished. I would wake to soft shuffles above, to the faint sound of breathing I couldn't locate. I began hearing things at the oddest hours. Whispers, the scrape of shoes, the click of a door that wasn't mine. I'd check, but nothing was there. No one was there. Then I found the first note. A scrap of lined paper slipped under my door. Written in neat, precise handwriting. "You like the mug there, don't you?" I stared at it for a long time, shaking. The mug, my favorite mug. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. I called Sam again, panic in my voice. He tried to calm me, suggested it was a prank, a coincidence. But I knew it wasn't. I began staying awake all night, watching, listening. Every creak of the floorboards became a potential signal. Every rustle of the ceiling above made my stomach tighten. I started noticing subtle signs. A shoe print in the dust on my windowsill. A small scratch on the doorframe that hadn't been there before. The faint smell of cologne that wasn't mine. The intrusions escalated. One night, I returned home from work and found my apartment subtly rearranged. The couch slightly angled, the TV remote on the floor instead of the table. My keys moved from the counter to the kitchen sink. Nothing stolen, nothing broken, just touched, marked, observed. I called the police. They came, checked everything, found nothing. Old building, they said. Probably just creaky floors, moving furniture for cleaning. But the feeling in my gut was louder than any rational voice. Someone had been here. Someone was watching. I became paranoid, obsessively checking locks, barricading windows, checking cameras constantly. I even started recording my own movements, marking times I left and returned, trying to catch whoever it was. Then came the first direct encounter. I woke to the sound of a whisper, soft, almost gentle, almost casual. My name. I froze. It wasn't coming from the street. It was inside. I held my breath, heart racing. The whisper repeated, "You're careful, aren't you?" I didn't move. I couldn't. The apartment felt alive. The ceiling above me seemed to hum, to pulse with presence. Shadows flickered just beyond the corner of my eye. I gripped the couch cushions until my knuckles turned white. Morning came, and nothing had moved. But the note was back, slipped under the door again. "I see everything." I decided to leave a camera above the ceiling vent in the hallway. I didn't expect it to help, but I had to try. I set it up, hid it behind a smoke detector, and waited. The next night, I watched the footage obsessively. At 2:13 in the morning, movement. Something small, deliberate. A figure crouched, moving across the vent, peering through the grate. A shadow of a human form. The face obscured, the eyes. I couldn't see, but I felt them. Watching, learning. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think. Every day became a cycle of dread and exhaustion. I stopped going out, stopped talking to friends. Every sound outside my apartment made my blood run cold. Every creak inside was amplified to a scream in my mind. Finally, I found the door unlocked again, just slightly, just enough to make me freeze. But this time, I saw a shape in the hallway, not a shadow, a real figure, standing there, watching. I ran. I didn't stop. I moved. across the city. New apartment, new locks, new doors, new floorboards. I told myself I was safe. I told myself the nightmare was behind me. But every so often, late at night, I feel it again. Small movements, subtle changes. A mug rotated slightly. A note slipped under the door. You're careful, aren't you? And sometimes, when I glance at a mirror, I swear I see someone just behind me, watching, waiting. If you're hearing this story, remember, it doesn't have to be supernatural to terrify you. Some horror is real. Some horror watches from above. And if you want more stories that creep into your mind and refuse to leave, subscribe to Halfway Dark, a horror box you can't close. The stranger who lived across the hall. I moved into the building because it seemed ordinary enough. Quiet street, mid-century brick, neighbors I never really saw. That's what made it comfortable. The kind of place where you can lock the door and forget the world exists outside. The first week was perfect. I unpacked boxes, arranged furniture, hung my few pictures, and felt like I finally had a space that belonged to me. But then, the weird things started. It was small at first. The faintest sound of a door closing across the hall when I hadn't heard anyone enter or leave. A chair moved slightly, just enough that I noticed. The elevator dinged even when no one pressed the button. I told myself I was tired. Moving in is exhausting. Old buildings make noises, rationalizations. Then the knocks began. 3 short, deliberate raps at the wall between my apartment and the one across the hall. Always at night, always at the same time. I ignored it at first, thinking maybe a neighbor with restless habits, maybe a pet upstairs. But then, a pattern emerged. The knocks weren't random. They were responding to me. If I walked to the kitchen, they followed. Knock, knock, knock. If I sat in the living room and whispered to myself, they answered. Tap, tap. I realized I wasn't imagining it. One night, I pressed my ear against the wall. At first, just silence. Then a faint rustle. Something shifting. Then a voice, barely audible. I see you. I jumped back, heart pounding. There was no way it could be my imagination. The voice was too clear, too deliberate, too human. I didn't sleep that night. I paced, watched the wall, waited for another sound. By morning, I was exhausted. But the knocks continued, every night, almost conversational. Days later, I found a note slipped under my door. No handwriting. Just typed letters, cut from a magazine. You left your mug crooked again. I froze. My mug, the one I had placed perfectly that morning. The idea that someone was watching me, no, studying me, terrified me. I called the building manager, described it, tried to laugh. Probably kids messing around, he said. But I knew it wasn't. Too precise, too persistent. I started recording. My phone against the wall, set to record any sound. I went to bed, paranoid, heart racing. At 2:17 in the morning, the recording caught something impossible. Whispering. Repetition of things I had said aloud earlier in the day. My own words echoed back at me, slightly distorted. I checked the door. Locked. Windows? Locked. Nothing. And yet I knew someone was there. The next day, small objects in my apartment were subtly rearranged. A book rotated on its shelf. A pen shifted an inch to the left. Every change minor, almost imperceptible, except to me. I began keeping logs, noting everything I moved and how it should remain. But the changes continued, always matching my notes, almost taunting me. I avoided going out. Friends texted. I ignored them. Every step outside felt like a breach of safety. But inside, nothing was safe either. One night, I heard the sound of footsteps pacing my floor. Not my own. Slow, deliberate. They circled the living room, paused by my bedroom door, then vanished. I stayed frozen under my blanket, listening. The apartment seemed to breathe with me. The walls themselves pulsed with the presence. The crescendo came on a Friday. I had left the apartment to grab groceries, and when I returned, the door to the apartment across the hall was slightly ajar. I hadn't seen that door open before, and something inside, something human, yet impossible to pin down, moved. I called out. Nothing. I stepped closer. The air felt heavy, thick. I reached for the door, hesitated, then peeked inside. Empty. But the apartment was pristine, almost too pristine, unnervingly so. Every object aligned perfectly, every surface spotless. And on the table, my mug, the same one I'd complained about being crooked, now perfectly straight. I ran back to my apartment. That night, the whispers returned. But this time, they weren't words, just sounds. Soft, human-like, rhythmic. Like someone breathing near my wall, moving along it in patterns I could feel but not see. By the following week, the intrusions had escalated. I found traces, footprints in the dust on my windowsill, fingerprints on my doorframe, tiny scratches on my furniture that hadn't been there before. I tried cameras. They showed nothing. Always nothing. Yet I knew someone was there. Someone who could enter my reality without leaving proof. I began to sleep with a knife under my pillow, lights on, doors locked, windows barred. Nothing helped. The whispers followed me, shadows moved just beyond sight, and small objects continued their impossible rearrangements. The final escalation happened when I woke one night to find the lights off in my apartment. Not the usual flicker, not the minor outages. Completely dark, and yet I felt presence. A figure across the room? No, too vague to call human. The air thickened. A voice whispering, but not my words this time. New words. You shouldn't have ignored me. I bolted to the door, locked, tried to call the police. Signal dead. Phone cracked in my hands. The room seemed to pulse, expanding and contracting. Walls bending slightly, not physically, but in a way that made me doubt everything I knew about my space. Morning arrived, and the apartment looked normal. No signs of forced entry, no objects misplaced beyond the usual subtle rearrangements, but I couldn't stay. I moved the next day, hastily, taking nothing but essentials. The new apartment should have been a fresh start. I thought it was. But sometimes, at night, when I put my mug down on the counter, I feel it. The subtle nudges, tiny shifts in objects. A creak from the ceiling, the faintest sound of breathing, far away, echoing. And once, late at night, I swear I heard the whisper again. I see you. The apartment above me doesn't exist anymore. At least, not in a way I can reach. But the sense of being watched hasn't left. It's inside my head now. It moves with me. And sometimes, when I tilt my head just right, I think I see shadows in the corner of my eye. Shapes that shouldn't be there. If you think strange things only happen to others, think again. Someone somewhere might be watching you right now, learning your routines, waiting for your attention. And if you want more stories that creep into your mind and refuse to leave, subscribe to Halfway Dark, the horror box you can't close. The house that answered back. I found the house on a quiet street, tucked behind overgrown hedges and a wrought iron fence that had seen better days. The listing made it sound charming. Creaky floors, vintage fixtures, a place with character. I didn't care about character. I wanted space to think, to write, to finally have a life that felt mine. The first week was everything I expected. Dusty corners, squeaky floorboards, a kitchen that smelled faintly of old wood polish. I cleaned, I organized, I unpacked boxes into what I thought of as my rooms. At night, the house settled in a comforting way. Groans and creaks, pipes sighing, normal sounds. Then came the first oddity. I was brushing my teeth late one night when I heard it. A soft creak from the attic. Not unusual in itself, but the timing was. I had just spoken aloud, muttering, "I should check the attic tomorrow," and the creak followed immediately, as if the house had acknowledged my thought. I paused, listening. Another creak, then silence. I shook my head, told myself it was nothing, and went to bed. The next morning, a box in the attic had been moved, slightly. Not enough to open it, just nudged, shifted. I hadn't been up there. No one else lived in the house. Rationally, I explained it. Maybe I had misremembered. Days passed. Small things began to happen more frequently. Lights flickered in rooms I wasn't in. Doors I left closed appeared ajar when I returned. A book I had placed on the desk was rotated slightly. A pen fell off the counter, landing perfectly upright. I began noticing patterns. The house was responding. Or maybe I was imagining it. I installed cameras in corners, discreetly, hoping for rational explanations. Footage showed nothing unusual. Shadows played tricks, maybe reflections, maybe overactive imagination. But the next morning, a mug I had set on the kitchen counter was in a completely different room. Not on a table, not on a shelf, just somewhere else. I stopped talking to friends about it. They laughed at my concerns. "Old houses are weird," they said. "It's nothing." But the feeling of being watched, of being observed by the very walls I lived within, gnawed at me. I began whispering my movements to myself, announcing small actions aloud to see if the house would react. And it did, always in tiny ways. A floorboard groaning under my steps, the refrigerator door opening just a fraction wider, a window latch clicking from the breeze as I entered the room. One evening, I tried to sleep with every light on. I wanted to see if the house would settle, if the normal sounds would resume. The ceiling fan moved slightly faster than usual. My bedroom door, which I had shut firmly, creaked and inched open. I froze, every sense sharpened. The house felt alive. I began to notice things that were impossible. My calendar pages, marked meticulously with deadlines, were slightly altered when I returned from errands. Notes I left for myself on the fridge were rewritten in my own handwriting, perfectly mimicking my scrawl, but subtly different. The phrasing slightly changed, the letters slightly slanted. I tried leaving the house for hours at a time. Went to cafes, parks, anywhere I could think of. Upon return, minor details inside were altered. My favorite chair rotated slightly. The blanket on the couch folded differently. Even the lights seemed dimmer in rooms I had left bright. The anxiety became unbearable. I couldn't sleep. I checked cameras obsessively. Nothing showed anyone entering, yet evidence mounted. Every detail, every minor change suggested observation, calculation, mimicry. The house was learning me, watching me, adapting. One night, I woke to the sound of typing. I didn't own a laptop in the living room. My bed was in the far corner. Heart hammering, I pulled myself up. The sound stopped. I approached. Nothing. Just the faint smell of dust and wood polish. And a page, typed and neatly printed, resting on the coffee table. "You forgot to lock the front door," I screamed aloud, unsure if it was relief or terror. I ran to check the door. Locked, always locked. But I couldn't shake the presence, the knowledge that something had entered, observed, and responded to me without ever leaving signs I could see. Sleep was impossible. I began leaving voice recorders, motion detectors, even motion-activated lights. Each night, the house responded in ways the devices didn't capture. Shadows shifted just outside their detection zones. Objects rotated subtly. My own patterns of movement were mirrored and manipulated. The final escalation came when I tried to leave. Bags packed, keys in hand, car parked. I returned to the house one last time to collect essentials I had forgotten. The moment I stepped in, I felt it. Presence. The air thickened. The floorboards groaned in deliberate rhythm. lights flickered. The kitchen door, which I had left closed, swung open fully. On the counter, my notebook, I hadn't touched it, was open, its pages rearranged. Notes I hadn't written were there. Calculations, thoughts I hadn't spoken aloud. Predictions about me, drawn in perfect, meticulous handwriting, my own style mimicked in ways that made my stomach twist. I left immediately, driving without stopping, leaving the house behind, never returning. But the memory lingers. Every creak in an old building makes my heart race. Every flicker of light in a hallway makes me tense. I can't explain it rationally. No one else will understand. And sometimes, late at night, I dream I hear it. A whisper of pages turning, floorboards creaking, lights clicking in patterns only I could recognize. The house answered back, and I will never forget. If you want more stories that crawl into your mind and refuse to leave, subscribe to Halfway Dark, the horror box you can't close. The apartment that forgot me. I moved into the apartment in late October. The building was quiet, almost unnervingly so. The hallways smelled faintly of aged carpet and cleaning chemicals. My unit, on the 3rd floor, had large windows and a high ceiling. It seemed perfect for writing, for finally being alone without distractions. The first night, I unpacked boxes, placed books on the shelves, and set my coffee mugs in a neat line on the counter. Everything felt right. Yet, as I lay in bed that night, I noticed a subtle shift in the air. A soft hum, almost like the walls were settling, or listening. The next morning, I discovered my favorite mug wasn't where I had left it. Not on the counter, not in the sink. It sat upright on the dining table, perfectly aligned with the edge, as if someone had arranged it. I lived alone. There was no one else. I laughed nervously, blaming fatigue and forgetfulness. But then it happened again. My notebooks, stacked neatly on my desk, were slightly rotated. Pens moved an inch to the left. Small, imperceptible changes, except I had not touched anything. At first, I rationalized. The apartment was old. Floors shifted slightly. Air currents nudged objects. But as days passed, the disturbances grew more deliberate. Shoes I left near the door were turned perfectly toward the hallway. The chair I had placed in the corner faced a different direction when I returned. I began to document it, writing everything down. Every object moved, every pattern I noticed. And the apartment seemed to respond. A book I moved yesterday would reappear in its original position today. A note I had placed on the fridge was removed overnight and replaced with a clean sheet of paper. Sleep became uneasy. I would wake, convinced I had heard footsteps in the hallway, the faintest scraping of fabric on floorboards. I checked the security camera I had installed. Nothing. The footage showed me alone. Yet, the evidence of movement persisted. One night, I awoke to find the lights dimmed in my living room. I didn't touch them before sleeping. I stood, staring, as the hum of the apartment grew louder. A shadow moved along the wall, subtle, almost imagined, but my gut told me it was there. I began testing the apartment, placing objects in odd arrangements to see if they would change. A vase on the windowsill tilted slightly. A pen balanced precariously on the edge of a desk. When I returned the next morning, the vase was upright, the pen laying flat. Nothing else in the building had been disturbed. The paranoia escalated. I stopped leaving the apartment for days. Meals arrived from delivery apps. I avoided calling friends, afraid they would think I had lost my mind. Yet the apartment continued its subtle manipulations, as if aware of my fear. Footsteps at night became louder. Objects rearranged themselves more noticeably. A chair would be flipped around, a book opened to a different page, a lamp angled toward the window instead of the bed. I began sleeping with all the lights on, hoping to deter whatever presence existed. The apartment seemed to learn me. It predicted my routines. When I tried to write, The notebook I had left on my desk appeared open to the last page I had written, sometimes with words slightly altered. When I left for a short walk, I returned to find my shoes lined up perfectly, as if waiting for me. I attempted to leave, packing bags and taking taxis to different parts of the city. But upon return, subtle changes greeted me. The hallway seemed slightly longer, the door frame slightly narrower, objects misplaced, but always in a way that suggested awareness of my habits. One evening, I found a note pinned to the fridge. Not handwritten, not printed from my own computer. Simple words, precise and unnervingly accurate. "You left the window unlocked today." I panicked. The apartment had no one else. How could it know? How could it respond? The final escalation came when I woke to the sound of typing. My laptop was shut. I didn't own any devices in the living room. The sound came from the corner of the room, faint, mechanical, deliberate. I approached, trembling. Nothing, just the faint smell of dust. And yet, the hum persisted. I decided to leave for good, packed quickly, left keys on the counter, called a moving van. The day I finally departed, I walked through the apartment one last time. Everything was exactly as I had left it, yet not. Slight shifts. Objects misaligned in ways I didn't remember. The apartment seemed aware, waiting. Even now, months later, I avoid old buildings with quirks. The memory lingers. The sense that the space around me could respond, observe, adjust. The apartment may not exist for me anymore, but its influence does. Every flicker of light, every shifted object, every creak of an old floor reminds me. Some places never forget, some spaces watch, and some never stop. If you want more stories that creep into your mind and refuse to leave, subscribe to Halfway Dark, the horror box you can't close. The woman who moved like me. I first noticed her on a Thursday morning. I had left my apartment late, fumbling with keys, coffee in hand. She emerged from the street just a few feet behind me, dressed in neutral colors, moving with a strange, deliberate pace. At first, I thought it was coincidence. People walk the same paths all the time. But then I noticed the timing. She appeared wherever I appeared. At the corner store, choosing the same brand of bread I always did. At the cafe, standing at the counter exactly as I approached, ordering the same drink. Always a step behind, always moving like me. I told myself it was nothing. Ordinary coincidence. People in the city shop at the same stores, take the same streets. Rationalizations. But the pattern grew undeniable. Days later, I was walking through the park. Late afternoon, golden light slicing through the trees. She was there again, half hidden behind a tree, her gaze fixed on me, yet she didn't move. I turned the corner. She mirrored me, stopped, waited, followed. I tried ignoring it, changed my routes, took different streets, different stores. Yet somehow, she always found me. Every time I sat in my apartment reading, she appeared outside the window, a shadow behind the glass, still just a few feet away. I began checking reflections, windows, mirrors, convinced it was impossible, yet always present. I left notes, tried speaking to her from a distance. She never responded verbally, just smiled faintly, a mirror of my expression. Sometimes it felt like she was perfectly copying my gestures, tilting her head the same way, shifting her weight as I did. The anxiety mounted. I started taking pictures of her whenever I saw her, documenting patterns. Every photograph confirmed it. The same coat, same neutral colors, same precise timing. No one else followed these routines. No one else moved like me. Sleep became difficult. I would wake in the middle of the night, convinced I could hear footsteps outside my apartment, shadows shifting across the hallway, the faint sound of clothing brushing against floorboards. Every creak amplified in my ears, every echo of life in the building magnified. Then came the first note, pinned to my door with a pushpin. Typed letters. "You moved the mug wrong today." I froze. My favorite mug, the one I always placed precisely on the counter. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. I hadn't written it down. No one knew. And yet here she was, watching, noting, correcting. I installed a small security camera, angled at the front door and windows. I thought maybe I could capture evidence, maybe feel some relief. The footage was strange. No one ever entered the frame directly. No one ever touched my door. But sometimes the corner of the lens caught a movement too quick, too subtle to see. A blur, a shadow shifting along a hallway outside my door. I avoided leaving my apartment. Friends called, worried, but I couldn't explain it. How do you tell someone a stranger moves like you, shadows you, rearranges your routines? They would think I was paranoid. Maybe I was. But everything, the notes, the timing, the impossibly precise mimicry, screamed otherwise. I began noticing small rearrangements inside my own apartment. A book tilted slightly, a pen shifted, the mug placed perfectly straight after I had left it crooked. The woman had entered. No signs of forced entry. No marks, just subtle, uncanny corrections. I confronted her once, standing across the street as she emerged from the park. I called out, my voice shaking, "Why are you following me? Who are you?" She smiled, mirrored my expression perfectly, tilted her head, just like I always did when confused or nervous. She didn't answer, just walked in perfect sync with me, a few steps behind, always observing. Her eyes, I couldn't read them, but I felt them everywhere, watching, learning, waiting. The situation escalated. I began leaving my apartment for hours at a time, thinking distance would break the pattern. She appeared everywhere, bus stops, grocery lines, street corners, always calm, always mirroring me. I tried leaving city blocks behind. I tried taxis, trains, detours. She found me. I stopped eating out, stopped going to stores, spent days and nights locked inside my apartment, rearranging my own movements to confuse her. I walked in circles, changed habits, altered routines. Nothing worked. She adapted, mirrored, anticipated. Then came the final confrontation. I returned home one evening to find my door unlocked. Not ajar, unlocked. Inside, everything was slightly altered. Nothing overt, but enough to set my nerves on fire. The pen on the counter, the mug aligned perfectly. My notes shifted. Her presence was unmistakable. I backed away, trembling. Footsteps echoed outside my apartment. A knock. Not harsh, not loud, just a precise, deliberate tap. I didn't respond. A shadow moved past the crack under the door. The air seemed to pulse with her attention. I packed immediately, took only essentials, left keys behind, changed my number, my routes, my daily habits, moved to a building several blocks away. New city, new apartment, everything different. I told myself it was over, but every now and then, a shadow lingers in the corner of my vision. A reflection in a window shows someone standing across the street, tilting their head, mirroring my expression. I swear I hear soft taps on the walls in rhythm with my steps. Small rearrangements appear overnight. She's never aggressive, never leaves direct traces. Just watches, mimics, exists just enough to unsettle. The feeling never fades. It's inescapable. If you think being followed is always obvious, think again. Some people watch quietly. Some learn to move with you, and some never stop. And if you want more stories that twist your mind and refuse to leave, subscribe to Halfway Dark, the horror box you can't close. The apartment across from mine isn't real. I first noticed it late one night when the city was silent except for distant sirens and the hum of streetlights. Across from my apartment, In the building opposite, a window glowed. It wasn't unusual for someone to be awake that late, but something about the glow felt deliberate. Too perfect. At first, I dismissed it. Maybe a neighbor working late. Maybe their television. But the next evening, I looked again. A figure was there, pale, indistinct in the shadows, sitting at a desk that seemed impossibly close to the window. I blinked. The figure moved. A hand raised mirrored exactly my own gesture as I adjusted my glasses. I froze. Couldn't be. I hadn't waved, hadn't even moved. But the figure tilted its head the same way I did. My stomach churned. Over the next few nights, I watched obsessively. The figure moved constantly, performing mundane actions, standing, sitting, pouring a drink, yet always in uncanny synchronization with my routines. When I made coffee, the figure held a cup. When I stretched, it mirrored me exactly. Sometimes it anticipated my movement, doing it first. I asked neighbors about it. Who lives there? I demanded, my voice low, urgent. No one, they said. That apartment has been empty for years. Empty. Yet I could see movement, could see the figure, could see the glow of life. I questioned my own sanity. Maybe it was a trick of light, a reflection. But no reflection could move independently. No reflection could anticipate gestures, mirror subtle shifts in posture, follow me in perfect mimicry. One morning, I found a note slipped under my door. Not written, not typed, but printed in perfect font. Simple words. I've seen you. You're mine now. I panicked. Called the building manager. Apartment didn't exist. Floor plans showed nothing opposite mine. Only blank wall and fire escape. I checked city records. Nothing. No unit number, no lease history. No mention of construction in that location. The figure continued. Every night. Always there. Always moving. I tried taking photos, videos, recording it on my phone. Each time I looked back, the images were blank. A light, a shadow, but no figure. Only the apartment remained. Impossibly lit, impossibly alive, impossibly still. A paranoia grew. I stopped leaving my apartment, except for work. When I returned, the building felt subtly different. Hallways stretched, doors shifted slightly. Objects in my own apartment were moved. A chair angled toward the window. A pen on the counter rotated a fraction. All small, subtle, but precise. I began talking to it aloud. Who are you? What do you want? I whispered at night. The figure mimicked my words, lip movements matching perfectly through the glowing window, but silent. No voice, no reply, just the movement. One night, I tried to confront it directly. I stepped onto my balcony, looking straight at the window. The figure froze, perfectly mirroring me, until I turned my head. And it smiled, a slow, deliberate, impossible smile. Its eyes seemed black voids, yet somehow aware of me, seeing everything. I fell back inside, shaking, tried to sleep, couldn't. The hum of the building, once comforting, now felt like a low growl. Every shadow stretched longer. Every floorboard groan became a threat. The next morning, I discovered a subtle but undeniable shift. My calendar, which I had meticulously updated, was altered. Deadlines moved, notes rewritten. Words I hadn't typed appeared, in my own handwriting. I hadn't been near the desk, yet the marks were precise, familiar. I began obsessively documenting everything, trying to rationalize. Each night, the figure appeared. Each day, the evidence of manipulation grew. My apartment became a mirror of its counterpart, or maybe the other way around. I couldn't tell anymore. Reality blurred. Weeks passed. The figure became bolder. At night, it stood at the window, hands pressed against the glass. Sometimes it tapped, a slow, deliberate rhythm. I started sleeping with all lights on, doors locked, blinds drawn. Nothing deterred it. Finally, I attempted to leave. Packed a bag, called a cab, decided to move to a different part of the city. As I opened the door, the hallway outside was subtly longer than I remembered. The elevator buttons had changed positions. The apartment numbers were slightly off, as if the building itself had warped. I ran, leaving my keys behind. Never looked back. Even now, months later, I drive past that street occasionally. The building appears normal, quiet, empty, but sometimes, in the glow of a late-night window, I catch the figure, standing, watching, mirroring, waiting. I can't explain it. No one else believes me. Neighbors insist the apartment is empty. The building records show nothing. Yet, I know what I saw, what I feel. The apartment across from mine isn't real, but it exists, and it will never stop. If you want more stories that creep into your mind and refuse to leave, subscribe to Halfway Dark, the horror box you can't close.